This story is so good, they'll be knocking down my door to sign it. Welcome to Not Safe for Words. I'm your host, Crystal L. Kirkham, multi-genre author, editor, and cover designer. I'm here to give you insight into the world of publishing and to help you avoid the mistakes that others have made. So stick around, you're in for one hell of a ride where I don't curb the curses. One of those big, terrifying moments as an author is when you submit your manuscript for consideration to a publication, a publisher, or an agent. And one of the reasons this is so terrifying is because we all know rejection is a part of this business. More likely than not, you're going to end up with more rejections than you have acceptances. And it doesn't matter if you're a good writer or if you have the most polished manuscript out there. Sometimes it just comes down to whether or not it's what they're looking for. But you also want to be sure when you're getting these rejections that you're not getting rejected for all the wrong reasons. And one of those reasons is a very common mistake I see happening a lot. If I'm being honest, I've made this mistake myself. And that is simply sending out a manuscript that isn't as ready as I thought it was. It's easy to convince yourself that you've put all the work you possibly can into your story and that it couldn't be any better than it possibly is. And if you're lucky, this is true. Now, of course, editors exist for a reason, no matter how good we think we are. Sometimes your story still needs to be fixed. In working as an editor, I've only ever encountered one story where I went through it 3 times and sat back and said to myself, there's not one thing I could really change on here that would be of any significance to improve this story. And that's incredible. But as I said, that has only happened once. The other end of the scale is something I come across a little bit more often. Stories that need so much work that I can't even get my head wrapped around where to begin editing them. And if that's the case, there's a really good chance I'm going to send you a rejection. Because I don't want to have to put more work into your story than the publisher is going to see back from it. And that is, unfortunately, a sad reality of this business. Editors put a lot of work into your story. They want your story to be good. They want to put the best possible product forward. But you have to help them get there. And that's what this is all about, is making sure that you're putting your best manuscript forward when you're submitting it to people. It's really easy to think a story is good enough. But we're talking about the fiction industry here, and it really is a flooded market. Agents and publishers and publications are getting so many stories all the time that the one that needs more work is less likely to get the acceptance than the story that needs less work. And yes, quality of the story is huge. The right timing for the right kind of story, also a big deal. But you can't count on your story being so good, the editor's always going to look past some very simple and evident mistakes that show that you couldn't care to put the effort into it. Because if you don't care, why should the person you're submitting to care? And that may not be the case. Maybe you just aren't that good at editing yet, and that's fine. It happens. We all have to start somewhere. But you've got to remember what this looks like from the other side, from somebody who's seen tens of dozens of hundreds of thousands of stories. They're not going to think that, okay, well, maybe this person is just new at editing, but the story is really darn good, so I'm going to say yes. They're probably going to think that you didn't want to put the effort and the time into it. Of course, the other thing to consider is you might get a reputation as an author who has so many stakes in their work that they see your name and it's an automatic rejection because they're so used to seeing such shoddy work coming from your direction that they're not even going to bother checking to see if you've actually improved. No one wants to be that person. So I guess the big question to ask yourself is, how do you know your manuscript really is ready to send out? The simple answer to this, and the one you're going to hear the most often, is that you have edited it to the best of your ability. Of course, as I've already pointed out, sometimes the best of your ability isn't going to be good enough. So one of the things I did when I was trying to figure out the best way to phrase this podcast was I turned to my good old friend Twitter and the writing community there. I asked people, what is the one piece of advice that you wish you had been given prior to starting to submit your stories? What's the best piece of advice that you have received? Of course, this being Twitter, not all answers were exactly on topic, but the ones that were, I would say about 80 to 90% of the people there simply said, read it again. If you think it's ready, when you feel like you couldn't make it any better than it actually is, read it one more time. Which is also very simple advice. However, it's simple advice that is really fucking hard when you're an author, because you've been through your story so many times already that you don't want to read it one more time. You just want to be done. You just want to submit it and hopefully get that acceptance letter that you're sure you deserve, and perhaps you do. But still, read it one more time. And variations of this advice, ones that I'm going to pass on to you, are things that I think are great ideas and worth a try to see if they work for you. One thing that seems to work universally is read your story out loud. And even as an editor, when I'm going to be editing work, I will actually use a text-to-speech to read the story to me so that I can get a feel for the entire project before I start focusing on the individual words that I'm going to be editing. As an author, I will actually physically read it out loud. And what this does is it brings a more natural flow to your story. And anytime you find yourself tripping over words or wanting to change how it sounds, change how you wrote it. Because the natural sounding stories, the ones that just flow, are the ones that pull a reader in. And of course, if it's going to pull a reader in, you're also going to find a submissions editor who is going to be pulled in by it too and want to bring that story right into the light so others can be pulled into it. Of course, if you're like me and you live alone, reading it out loud kind of feels a little silly because nobody's listening to you. I tell the story to my dogs. If you don't have dogs or cats, tell the story to a plant, to a wine bottle. Draw a paper figurine and read that story to them. It doesn't matter who you're reading to or if you feel like an idiot doing it. Trust me, you are going to find a lot more mistakes by reading a story out loud than you will ever find reading it in your head. Because when you're the author, when you're reading it in your head, your brain just automatically fills in the gaps or fixes many of the mistakes that you've made because you know what the story is supposed to say. By doing it out loud, you're actually engaging different parts of your brain, so you are forced to think about what you're saying. And it's a great piece of advice. Another one that I actually haven't seen before, and I'm going to give it a try one day myself, and I think you should do, is reading your story line by line backwards. This prevents you from getting pulled into the narrative and focusing on the words instead. And of course, I'm also going to refer you back to our last episode where we talked about your early readers, your ARCs, your betas, your CPs, the people who read it before it's actually ready for its public debut. It never hurts to have another set of eyes on your work. Make sure before you send that story out that you've given yourself every advantage possible. It's not hard to find people who are able to give you a second opinion. It's really not that difficult to read the story one more time when you think it's actually finally done. And you never know, that could be the one key difference between the rejection and the acceptance. This has been another episode of Not Safe for Words. I hope you found some useful advice here today. If you have feedback on this or any other episode, tweet me or leave a voicemail on Anchor FM. Don't forget to join me next time for more publishing and writing insights. Thanks for listening.